Montana Territory, autumn of 1881. The wind was already sharp with snow when Odessa Hart's water broke in the middle of a thunderstorm. She had not expected it to happen so soon. Not here. Not like this. The sky outside the barn cracked with lightning as she leaned against a wooden beam, her breath coming fast, hands gripping her swollen belly. Her horse, a dun mare named Willa, paced nervously in her stall. Odessa stumbled toward the hayloft ladder, the pain twisting inside her like a hot knife. She could not make it back to the house. Her body had made that decision for her. She climbed. Halfway up, her boot slipped. She let out a cry and grabbed the rung above her just in time, the thunder masking her scream. She dragged herself into the loft, collapsed onto the hay, and curled on her side. Her linen dress was soaked through. Her contractions came hard and fast. She was alone, or so she thought. Below, the barn door swung open. "Miss Hart," a man called out, his voice deep, edged with worry. "Odessa." She could not answer. Another contraction knifed through her, and she bit down on a scream. The man appeared at the base of the ladder just seconds later, lantern in hand. His face tilted up, eyes narrowing as he spotted her through the shadows. "Good Lord, hold on. I'm coming up." She knew that voice. Odessa blinked through the haze of pain, her breath caught. "Xavier," she croaked. Xavier Connolly had been her neighbor growing up, 3 ranches over. They had not seen each other in 4 years. The last time had been at her husband's funeral. He had stood behind everyone else, hat in hand, not saying a word. He climbed fast, 2 rungs at a time, the boards creaking under his boots. When he reached her, he knelt beside her without hesitation. "You're in labor." She gave a short nod, her lips trembling. "The baby's coming now." His eyes scanned her quickly, hand brushing the damp hair from her forehead. "Then we'll do what we have to." She had no strength left to argue. Xavier stripped off his coat and laid it beneath her. He moved with quiet purpose, rolling up his sleeves, checking her pulse, wiping her brow with a square of linen. His hands were steady. She had not known he could be this calm. He had always been the wild one, the one who drove his horse too fast, laughed too loud. Now he was the only person keeping her from falling apart. "Odessa, I need you to breathe. Just like that. Good. You're doing good." The storm raged outside. Inside the hayloft, time slowed. The pain built, wave after wave, and Xavier never left her side. His hand stayed pressed against hers through every scream, every silence. And then, just as dawn lit the edge of the sky, Odessa's cry broke into a sob, and a baby's first wail filled the loft. Xavier caught the child in his arms, wrapped her carefully in his shirt, and looked down at her with something like awe. "It's a girl," he said softly, voice rough with emotion. Odessa's chest shook with relief. Her arms trembled as she reached for her daughter. Xavier gently laid the child in her arms, his palm resting on the infant's back. "She's strong," he said. Then, with a quiet smile that softened the hard lines of his face, he added, "Then she'll be strong like her mama." Odessa looked up at him, eyes full of tears. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The barn was quiet now, the storm passed. The baby settled against her chest, warm and perfect. Odessa reached out and touched Xavier's hand. "Thank you," she whispered. His fingers curled around hers. "You do not have to thank me," he said. "I was just in the right place." She shook her head. "No. You came. You helped me. You stayed." He did not answer, just looked at her for a long time, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he helped her sit up, cradling the baby, and wrapped his coat around both of them. "We need to get you to the house," he said. "You and the little one." Odessa nodded, exhausted. "Her name is Lark." Xavier smiled. "That fits." He carried both mother and child down from the hayloft, careful with every step. Odessa leaned against him, her face tucked into his neck, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. He brought them inside, stoked the fire, and made sure she had warm water and clean linens. Then he sat by her bed, holding the baby so Odessa could rest. When she woke again, Lark was asleep in a cradle by the hearth, and Xavier was dozing in the chair beside her, arms crossed, hat tipped low. She stared at him for a long time. He had changed. His shoulders were broader, his face more lined, but the calm steadiness in him that was new. And it stirred something in her chest she had not let herself feel in years. She reached for his hand without thinking. His eyes opened, You stayed, she said quietly. I am not going anywhere, he answered. And somehow, Odessa knew he meant it. The first snow fell 2 nights later. It came silent and steady, a hush over the pines and low hills that wrapped around Odessa's homestead like quiet arms. Inside the cabin, warmth clung to the log walls, firelight catching in the folds of worn quilts and the steam rising from a pot of barley stew. Odessa moved slowly now. Her body still ached, but the worst had passed. Lark slept tucked against her chest, wrapped in the last of the cotton blankets her mother had sewn years before. Odessa's hair, plaited in a thick rope, brushed the child's cheek as she leaned back in the rocking chair by the hearth. Xavier was bent over the table, oiling the hinge of her front door. It had started sticking in the cold. He didn't speak as he worked, but his presence filled the room like another heat source, steady, quiet, there. You could have gone home hours ago, she said softly. He didn't look up. I'm not in a rush. She studied the curve of his shoulders beneath his flannel shirt. The way his hands moved, methodical, practiced. He had changed since the boy she remembered, but something in him still held that same quiet defiance, the refusal to do anything halfway. You always fix things when they don't belong to you? She asked, not with challenge, just curiosity. He straightened slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. Always figured if something's broken close by, it's already my problem. Odessa looked down at Lark. The baby's breath was warm against her collarbone. You were always like that, she said. Even when we were kids. Remember when my brother's horse kicked the fence down and you came by before sun up to mend it? I remember your father trying to chase me off with a shovel. Odessa laughed, surprised by the sound. It reached Xavier's face, and for a moment, his expression opened. Not a grin, but something quieter, appreciation, maybe, or just the comfort of being remembered without fault. She hesitated, then asked, Why did you come to the barn that night? He sat down across from her, resting his elbows on his knees. I saw the light in your loft. Figured maybe you'd left something burning. Then I heard you cry out. She nodded slowly, fingers stroking Lark's back. You hadn't come by in years. I was trying to stay out of your way. You were never in it. He looked at her then. Your husband was my friend. I didn't know where I belonged after he passed. Didn't think you'd want me around. Odessa shifted in her chair, the ache in her back flaring, but she didn't look away. You were part of my life long before he was. Xavier dropped his gaze. That's what made it harder. Lark stirred, her hands curling in sleep. Odessa adjusted her gently, then asked, And now? He rubbed his jaw, his voice low. Now I'm here, and I'm staying as long as you'll let me. She didn't answer right away. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks against the stone hearth. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the glass panes with soft gusts. My milk cow's gone dry, she said after a moment. And the well buckets are starting to splinter. I'll fix the buckets tomorrow, he replied. And I've got a heifer that'll calve soon. You can have the milk. Her throat tightened. You don't owe me anything. I know. His voice was even. Doesn't mean I don't want to give it. They sat in silence for a long time after that, the kind that didn't press or demand. Just the soft crackle of fire, the rhythm of breath, the slow ticking of the clock above the mantel. When Lark whimpered, Odessa stood, her legs unsteady. Xavier was up before she could take a second step, reaching out. She hesitated, then handed the baby to him. He held her carefully, like he'd done it 100 times, his arms forming a cradle that kept her close to his chest. Lark quieted instantly, her face tucked against the wool of his shirt. Odessa watched him, the way he swayed just slightly on his feet, slow and sure. The sight wrapped around her with unexpected warmth. You're good with her. She trusts me. He looked up, just like her mama did, when it mattered. Odessa felt something shift deep in her chest. Not sudden, not fierce, just sure, like the slow turning of earth under thaw. When he finally handed Lark back, his hands brushed hers. He didn't pull away fast. Neither did she. I'll sleep in the lean-to tonight, he said quietly. There's enough hay, and I'll be close if you need anything. She nodded, her voice lodged somewhere behind her ribs. Thank you, Xavier. He stood in the open doorway for a moment, snow catching in his hair, the cold wind painting his silhouette in silver. Then he stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind him. As Odessa settled Lark into the cradle, the firelight flickered over the worn floorboards and the quiet corners of the room. Something had changed, not in a rush, not all at once, but in the way roots move beneath frost, readying for spring. She lay down with the quilt pulled to her chin, and for the first time in months, sleep came without resistance. By late November, the snow stayed on the ground. The land turned brittle beneath it, all color drained from the hills save for the heavy greens of pine and juniper. Odessa rose before the sun most mornings, careful not to wake Lark as she lit the stove and stepped into her wool-lined boots. Xavier had repaired the lean-to into something more serviceable by then stacked fresh pine along the walls, sealed the roof with pitch, dragged in a cot she hadn't realized was still up in the hayloft. He came inside each morning just as she was setting the kettle to boil, brushing snow from his coat and asking, without ceremony, what needed doing that day. That morning, she found him near the pasture fence, hammer in hand, sleeves rolled to his elbows. A pair of fox tracks crossed the yard behind him, light as threads in the snow. "You're up early," she said, voice low from sleep. "Gate was sagging," he replied. "Figured it'd give way by week's end if I didn't set a new post." She stepped onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter. "You don't have to keep fixing things." He drove the nail in with a final strike, then leaned back. "I know. That's not why I'm doing it." Odessa glanced toward the barn. "The mare's been restless. I think she's carrying again." He nodded. "I'll check her hooves later." "But she walks clean." They stood without speaking for a stretch, steam curling from the coffee mug in her hand. She watched him shift his weight, brush frost from his cuffs. He didn't fidget like he used to. He moved like someone who'd spent hard years reading the weather and worn paths with his own boots. She cleared her throat. "You planning to stay through winter?" He didn't look surprised by the question. "I was thinking I might. If there's room." "There's room," she said. "Long as you don't mind helping with more than fences." He met her eyes. "I don't mind anything that keeps me close to you and the little one." Odessa's breath caught, just once. She turned toward the house, voice steady. "You should come in before the coffee gets cold." That night, after Lark settled into sleep, Odessa pulled a worn ledger from the cupboard and set it on the table. Xavier sat across from her, drying his hands on the towel from washing up. The fire behind them popped and shifted, casting soft shadows along the walls. "I've been meaning to go through this," she said, opening it to a page marked with a red ribbon. "It's the last of the accounts. Supply orders, debts owed, that sort of thing." He leaned forward, scanning the page. "Looks like you've kept it all tight." "Barely," she murmured. "But the winter hay cost more than I planned." "I still have feed to spare," he said. "And I know a trader who'll take jerky and tallow come January. We could set a run between us." Odessa raised her brow. "We?" He didn't smile, but his voice gentled. "I've been thinking about putting up a small cabin on your west ridge. Could keep my cattle close, help you run the place, keep this roof over your head from ever having to sag again." She ran her fingers along the ledger's edge. "What would people say?" He shrugged. "They already say plenty. Let them." She closed the book. "You'd give up your land?" "I'd still ride the boundary. But I never felt settled on that stretch. Not like I do here." Odessa looked at him in the firelight. His eyes didn't waver. Not bold, not pleading. Just steady. That same quiet steadiness that had gotten her through the longest night of her life. "You were always close," she said. "Even when you weren't." He leaned back in his chair. "I didn't know how to come back. Not until that night in the loft." Outside, the wind stirred loose snow from the roof. Lark rustled in her cradle, then stilled again. Odessa rose and crossed the room. She bent to check the baby's blankets, then turned back, arms folded across her bodice. "If you're building on that ridge," she said slowly, "you might as well take supper at the table, not the porch." He stood, as if waiting for her to change her mind. When she didn't, he crossed the room and reached for the dishes without a word. They worked side by side, the rhythm easy, practiced. When she passed him a plate, their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away. That night, long after the fire burned down to coals, he laid his bedroll beside the hearth. Odessa didn't ask him to stay. She didn't have to. The quiet between them was no longer empty. It was full with things still unspoken, but understood. Like how he turned his face toward hers in sleep. Like how she left the door unlatched. 2 weeks after the last snowfall, Odessa stood in the back garden with a laundry basket balanced on her hip, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching Lark stretch her limbs in the cradle Xavier had carved from cedar. He'd added a ridge of delicate notches along its edge, simple, careful work that didn't ask for thanks but lingered in her chest all the same. The sky was pale and cloudless, brittle with winter light. A pair of blue jays darted from birch to pine, their calls sharp above the silence. Odessa hung the last of the cloth diapers, her hands stiff with cold, and turned toward the house, just as Xavier came around the side with an armful of firewood. "You're stacking too much in the lean-to," she said, brushing her palms on her skirt. "No sense risking rot if the roof gives." He set the wood down near the porch. "I reinforced the beams yesterday. It'll hold." They weren't braced right to begin with. She nodded once, stepping past him to lift Lark from the cradle. The baby yawned against her shoulder, warm under her flannel wrap. Xavier stood quiet for a moment. "I rode out toward the old riverbed this morning. Saw fresh elk sign down in the hollow." "You thinking of hunting?" "I'm thinking the herds pulled closer to the valley. Might be a hard winter." She shifted Lark to her other side. "There's a snare shot up by the east line. I've been meaning to reset it. I'll take care of it after supper." Odessa glanced at him as they stepped inside. "You keep saying that like you've decided this is yours to run." He didn't sit, just leaned near the stove to warm his hands. "I've made up my mind. Question is whether you have." She folded Lark's wrap snug and rested her in the cradle by the hearth. "I haven't had much time to think on anything but keeping her fed and the chimney drawing." "I know. That's why I've been here. So you could." She turned to face him. "Every day you stay, this place quiets." Xavier looked down at his hands. "I like the quiet. Always did. I didn't know that about you." "You didn't know me much after I turned 20, he said. "You married Thomas right when I started working cattle up near Judith Gap. Then the war came. By the time I came back, you had a home, a husband, and no space for old neighbors." Odessa let the words settle. Outside, a crow called once, then again. She picked up a piece of kindling, set it in the stove, and closed the iron door. "I never asked where you went after the burial," she said. "You were there, then gone. I couldn't sit in your parlor with the smell of death still in the walls." She crossed her arms. "You were angry with him." "I was," he answered. "But not when he died. Only before. He left you too much to carry." Odessa turned away, brushing invisible dust from the windowsill. "He meant well. Meaning well isn't the same as doing right. You've carried this place mostly alone." She didn't respond. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. "I want to ask you something." "Go on." "If spring comes, and I'm still here, would you let me build near the cottonwoods? Not just for shelter, for staying for good." She didn't turn. "That's a long thing to ask. I know. I'm not looking for charity or pity, but I've been in 100 places and none of them felt like much. This place does." Odessa's voice was low. "You'd be giving up land of your own. I'd be gaining something else. I want to be where I'm needed, not just where there's open ground." Lark stirred in the cradle, one small fist stretching toward the quilt. Odessa stepped over and bent to settle her. Her hand lingered on the baby's back. "I never planned to raise her alone," she said. "You won't have to." She looked at him then. "You mean it?" He nodded. She searched his face for anything unsure, but found only steadiness. Not urgency, not pleading, just a man offering what he had. "All right," she said. "Start cutting the timber for the cabin come next thaw." His shoulders eased, and he smiled not wide, but enough to crease the corner of his eyes. "I'll need to bring tools from the shed near my old line," he said. "Might take 2 days. Then take the mule cart," she said. "And bring back that dry grain sack I left out there last year. It's still got my mother's stitching on the edge." "I'll see to it." As he turned toward the door, she paused him with her voice. "Xavier." He looked back. "I'm not saying yes because I need help. I wouldn't want you to. I'm saying yes because it's you." He held her gaze, then tipped his head once and stepped out into the cold. Odessa watched him go, the wind lifting his coat as he crossed the yard. Snow began to fall again in slow, silent flakes. Inside, Lark let out a soft sigh in her sleep, and Odessa wrapped the quilt tighter around her shoulders, the warmth of the fire and the promise of what was coming settling deep in her bones. The first thaw came in early March, softening the edges of the snowbanks and sending trickles of meltwater down the gullies behind the barn. Odessa stood with her sleeves rolled, turning soil along the front garden bed with a short-handled spade, her breath rising in pale clouds. Lark slept in a sling across her chest, her weight familiar and comforting. From the ridge where the cottonwoods stood, the sound of sawing echoed in steady rhythm. Xavier had been working since dawn, his coat hung on a tree branch, shirt sleeves damp with sweat and sawdust. He paused only to drink from the tin flask tied to his belt, then bent again to his task, the saw biting clean through the pine. Odessa leaned on the spade, watching him for a moment. The way he moved with quiet intention stirred something deep in her that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the ache of hope. She hadn't expected that to return to her, not after what she'd buried. She walked up the slope slow, careful not to wake Lark. Xavier looked up as she approached, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist. "You'll wear your hands out if you keep at it without a break," she said. "I've worn worse things out for less good reason," he said, glancing at the baby. "She's staying down all right. She always does when I'm moving." He stepped aside to let her see the low frame he'd laid along the clearing. The outline of the cabin took shape now, squared and level. He'd notched the first beams already, each one fit with care, the corners tight and true. "I wanted to ask you about the window," he said. "I can face it east, if you want morning light in the main room." She tilted her head. "That'd be good. The wind cuts from the north anyway." "Then east it is." They stood side by side for a moment, the breeze tugging gently at her apron ties. "I've been thinking," she said. "Once you finish this, there's no reason for you to sleep out here anymore." He didn't answer right away. "I didn't want to assume." "You didn't," she said. "I'm telling you." He looked at her then, something quiet and steady passing between them. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "It's time. You've already lived every day with us. Might as well sleep under the same roof." He laughed low in his throat, not unkindly. "That's the plainest proposal I ever heard." "I've never been good at dressing things up," she said. "But I mean it." He reached out and touched her waist, tentative but sure. "I want to wake up with you in the same room. I want to sit across the table every morning and see steam rising from your cup." Odessa leaned into him, her hand resting against his chest. "Then do." He kissed her then slow. "Sure, no rush in it." Lark stirred, and they both laughed quietly, their foreheads resting together. That night, with the sky pale blue and the stars just beginning to show, Xavier brought his bedroll into the cabin. He laid it beside hers without ceremony, and they sat on the floor near the hearth, eating cornbread and beans from a shared bowl. Lark cooed from the cradle. Xavier had moved inside, her small hands waving at the flicker of firelight. "You ever think we'd end up here?" he asked, his voice low. She passed him a slice of bread. "Not once. But I'm glad we did." He took her hand in his, rough fingers brushing her knuckles. "I want to build more than walls and door frames. I want to build a life with you, every day forward." Odessa met his gaze, her heart steady. "Then let's." They married on the first Sunday in April, in a clearing behind the house where wild crocus had begun to bloom. The preacher from town rode out at first light, his coat smelling of wood smoke and saddle oil. The ceremony was short, with only the wind and the birds as witnesses, but the vows were spoken clear and without trembling. Xavier held Lark in his arms while they spoke, and when Odessa said, "Yes," the baby reached out, curling her fingers in his collar. They spent that night beneath quilts stitched long ago by Odessa's mother, the candlelight soft against the chinked walls. Sleep came easy, wrapped in the scent of pine and bread, wrapped in the sound of someone breathing near. By summer, the garden was green with peas and carrots, and sunflowers stretched taller than the porch rail. Lark learned to crawl across the floorboards, her laughter echoing through the house. Xavier built a small bench beneath the cottonwoods, where they sat in the evenings, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The land didn't stop being hard, and the work never let up, but it no longer felt like something to bear alone. In time, they added a second room to the house. A cradle became a bed. Two names carved into the lintel weathered but stayed. The seasons turned, and with each turn, the love between them held firm and quiet. They grew old together in the shadow of the ridge, where the wind always blew clean, and the sky stretched wide enough to hold all they'd been through. And each morning, before the day's chores began, Xavier poured 2 cups of coffee and passed one to Odessa, steam rising between them in the hush of dawn.